Hey TV fans, bored now, back with Rachel Macdonald and the team up. We're back together again to return to Stranger Things. This is going to be a double review of the first two episodes of the brand new Stranger Things. So, Stranger Things 4. So, this is going to be chapter 1, which is called the Hellfire Club, and then chapter 2, which is the Curse of Vecna. And luckily Rachel told me how to say that before putting it on air. Very useful. So penultimate season. As we go through the season, we'll be speculating on what could lie ahead in the final season. But anyway, this season obviously marks a bit of a direction change for the show because of what happened at the end of season 3. And at the start of the season, at least, you sort of got storylines spread over 3 different locations. You've got a little bit of stuff going on in Russia. You've got obviously most of the characters still based in Indiana, and then you've got the Byers family who are obviously now based in California. It is just kind of set up, and you're getting to know what the characters are doing because obviously they're in slightly different places now, and it's you get a little hint of what might come, but I think you get bigger stuff in the second episode when it comes to maybe what the monster is going to be this season or the storyline. So I think what we'll do is we'll give our impressions overall without going to spoilers, and then we'll sort of work our way through the characters, because I think in this first episode it is sort of mostly talking about the characters and what they're up to. So, Rachel, just general thoughts on the first episode, and we'll get to episode 2 later.
Yeah, I thought it was a solid reintroduction to the characters. I like that it opened with Eleven's voiceover writing a letter to Mike. I thought it was actually really cool, and we'll get more into this when we talk about characters, that you could notice that while Elle's speech has improved, she still has an odd cadence. She kind of clips her words sometimes, uses over-exaggerated grammar to show that she's still integrating. It was amazing to see the kids. Oh my God. Someone put a stretching spell on Mike Wheeler. What happened to that kid? Like, every single one of the kids obviously looks older, but Mike looks like a whole other person. He was seriously freaking me out. But it's like between Harry Potter 3 and 4, when Neville Longbottom suddenly got like really tall and really skinny, and everyone just went, whoa. So I feel like Mike has had that kind of transformation. Lucas rocking the flat top. Luke is looking real good.
Yeah, he looked pretty different, didn't he?
With his flat top, yeah.
Really,
no, I thought it was.
Up.
Yeah, I thought it was a really nice reintroduction to the characters. So I liked how Elle's letter showed how, she settled in with the Byers. We get reintroduced to all the characters, and they all feel like, their characterization is in place and intact. Oh, I love Jonathan's characterization so far this season. They're actually giving him some stuff to do, and he's having a bit of fun. It's nice to see. We find out Joyce is working from home, selling Britannica encyclopedias. Who remembers Britannica encyclopedias? Because we are actually old enough to remember them. And yeah, I thought it was a really nice way to ease back in. The Hellfire Club, we'll talk a little bit more about that club and that name and what I think it might mean. But I thought that was really good. It was really nice to see all the characters. I think everyone's obviously settled back into their roles. They obviously know these characters really well now, all of these little actors, and they've always been so good right from the beginning. And you can see with every season, they seem to get more and more comfortable and learn more about their characters and become more their characters. That opening 8 minutes was very, very interesting. Obviously, that was released ahead of time. For everyone to see, but that entailed
a great bit of marketing. I mean, let's give them props for that here.
Definitely.
Yeah. And the trailers for this season have been fantastic. I mean, that's how you do a trailer, pretty much.
And that is the thing with Stranger Things that I find, and I have found this with every season, even though, like I've talked about in previous videos, how I have a little bit of fatigue with Stranger Things. Part of me is like, oh my God, it should have ended. But it's like, but every season they release something, or they do some marketing, or they do something that then sucks me back in. Like, I wasn't feeling that excited about season 4, and then they dropped to that first 8 minutes, and I just went, oh, dude, I need to see
Yeah,
this. So yes,
that's a
very
great
effective
sort of
marketing.
hook.
So yeah, I
Mhm.
thought the first episode was solid. I agree that with what you said, that it was mostly just re-establishing, because you have to do that,
Mhm.
obviously. But I did like the little hints and the little bits and pieces we were starting to get about the monster, which we obviously see a bit more of in episode 2. So I thought it was a solid beginning. What about you? How did you go with the first episode?
I think solid's the word. I would
Mhm.
maybe say from the 4 seasons so far, it's probably the weakest of the opening episodes out of those 4 seasons.
Okay.
I think there was, some scenes I weren't so keen on, and I'm just wondering if maybe it's just a case of this is all set up, and as we work
Mm,
through it, and because
yeah.
obviously, generally speaking, with Stranger Things, it's sort of once you get into what they're actually doing, like the case or
Yes.
them getting together as a group and investigating stuff, because obviously in episode 2 there's a bit more of like investigating and things like that, then
Mm,
I think that's sort of when the show really starts getting into like
yes.
proper gear.
Mm,
But no, I mean, it was a solid first episode. There was some good character stuff. I, for one, noticed a more serious, darker tone, and
hmm
obviously they've been talking about how this is going to be the darkest season yet,
Oh, it definitely
and
is, isn't it?
so
Yeah.
far it's
Mm,
shaping up to be that.
hmm
I think, and there was some good drama. I think, particularly with Max and Al, I think there was some really good drama with those two. Like you, I remember you saying this, but like you, I quite like the idea of what they're doing with Max this season, like kind of from the fallout with the Billy stuff last
Yeah.
season. And I think at those two, like their scenes in this first episode were the highlight. And there was other stuff I enjoyed. I mean, it's sort of funny how I didn't find it as funny as your typical Stranger Things episode. There were
Mm.
definitely moments I sort of laughed and enjoyed. And I mean, I was watching it with my mum, and we both laughed sort of out loud at like the Erica stuff, like the Erica line in the how. Well, I can tell by your face you're still not converted
No, no,
yet.
no, no, no. I'm coming
That
round.
scene was, yeah,
That theme was
but
good. I
we'll get
liked that
to
scene. We'll get
that.
to it. Yes.
And I like that scene from a storytelling point of view
Mm.
as well. But yeah, but no, there were some rough scenes I thought in this first episode personally. So yeah, some rough edges, but overall, I agree that then it was like a solid sort of start. So I think before we move on, it obviously makes sense to talk about those 8 minutes, those opening 8 minutes, and you sort of get a good subversion straight away, because
Yes.
your initial reaction is probably to think, okay, this is going to be in 1986, because the first shot is just like a newspaper boy like
Yeah.
chucking a newspaper, like, and there's a bit of a gag with it where you just see him throwing all these different newspapers, and he's a useless shot, he keeps missing the target basically. But your initial thought is this is just going to be in the present, like
Yes.
1986, but then it's revealed it's actually in 79,
hmm
and it's of course Branagh. And at this point, I mean, in the first episode anyway, because there's been speculation since season 1 that Branagh might still be alive. Now that
Mm.
hasn't been confirmed, but obviously this is an important sort of flashback. This gives a bit more of a backstory to him and to Eleven
Yeah.
experimenting with these kids. We see him particularly with number 10 and experimenting, and then obviously a very dark turn of events with 11, which a very young 11, which obviously leads to a couple of, well, multiple deaths really, and that's a very graphic scene with the
hmm
camera tracking throughout the facility. And also, I'll say also then these first 2 episodes they're both directed by the Duffer Brothers, and
Yes.
I think that's important, because when they direct the episodes, the direction is really on point.
Yeah.
They really know how to direct and put things together. So just a small example in that scene, the fact then when you go to the facility and you go to like Branagh with like this other kid, it actually focuses in on the door saying 11. So that's a nice little directing touch, which obviously makes it clear then she's going to be important to that scene, sort of thing. So yeah, what did you think of that stuff?
It's a great opening scene. I mean, yeah, from the kid missing all the houses with the newspaper to you seeing this person and you're like, who is this? And then you slowly come to realize, oh, it's the bad man. It's Brenner. And I think that scene, I think it's interesting because it actually shows us, because we've only ever seen Brenner as a monster, but this shows us that there were times when he seemed to have been good with the kids. Like, you know, he seems to be good with 10. 10 doesn't seem to be scared of him at all. You know, so we get to see a slightly different side to Brenner. I think the horror in that scene is done so well. And Stranger Things has always been on the line between science fiction and horror, but I think that this season they're really pushing into the horror, which is, of course, totally up my alley. Love anything that's got like awesome horror vibes. It was so violent, that first scene. It was so intense. I was so surprised that they showed us like actual children dead. But my biggest question about this scene, and we're going to talk more about this as we get into the series, because I have a theory emerging that I think they're trying to pay homage to a certain comic book series. Okay. But I'm wondering, so we see Elle here, and she's what, probably 8 years old here? And we see that she has enough power to take out an entire facility, guards, children, adults, in like one fell swoop. But we've never seen Elle with powers this big and this effortless. And when we meet her in season 1 and we see the flashbacks, she's having trouble even just smushing a Coke can, you know? So it's like, what did they do to her in 1979 that reduced her power? Or is this not Elle? And the other working theory that Steve and I have is that this is something working through Elle. Something's possessed her and used her power, because we've never seen her have this level of power, not when she was this young. We see as the series goes, her power gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I think the most power we've seen her show is when she takes out the Mind Flayer at the end of season 3, but not when she was when she first turned up. She had to concentrate just to, you know, just to kill 3 people at the end of season 1. Whereas here, she's able to slaughter a whole group of people. And also, why? Why has she done this? So I am wondering if we're going to get some sort of X-Men type storyline with Elle being akin to like Dark Phoenix, and this power somehow has been locked away inside of her by these people, and it's somehow going to explode. That's my working theory. And the reason I'm going with X-Men is because I've picked up at least 3 or 4 X-Men references so far. And to me, that doesn't seem accidental. I feel like we're moving towards possibly some sort of Dark Phoenix storyline or something like that, because the Hellfire Club is a very big part of the Dark Phoenix storyline in the X-Men comics. So the fact that their D&D club is called the Hellfire Club, and there's a few others, I think Dustin mentioned Cerebro at some point. And so I'm like, there's a lot of X-Men stuff here. Like, so I'm very interested to find out what this backstory is with little Elle. How did she have so much power at this point? And what did they do to her to shut this power off to the point where she has to concentrate to smash a Coke bottle when she could obliterate a whole building full of people? So that for me, that is the most interesting part of that sequence, is to find out what happened to her.
Some of her friends questioning, you know, how much is too much for her. And well, I think with Elle, you sort of have this question of, you know, is it necessarily good that she has these powers? And obviously in certain circumstances they're called upon, but in general it's maybe best to rein them in, especially if she's going to live as a normal girl in the regular world. And from what I've seen so far of this season, it looks like that's going to be quite a big theme in this season.
Do need to ask you something, because I haven't watched season 3 since it first aired. So does she lose her powers at the end of season 3? Do they give an explanation, or is this just something new in season 4? Because I couldn't remember if they mentioned that she lost her powers at the end of season 3.
I don't remember anything at the end of season 3, so
Okay.
it seems
So
to
this
be
is just
new for.
mm.
Yeah, I mean, because at the moment it seems like they're playing her stuff very much as more of a drama, which doesn't have that much to do with obviously like a
Yeah.
sci-fi or a horror style plot.
Powers went, because these aren't powers that were gifted to her or that were a result of an experiment. She had these from inside the womb. I mean, that's why they took her away from Terry
Yeah.
when she was a baby. So my working theory at the moment is that she's blocked her powers subconsciously. Like, she doesn't know it,
Mm.
but she's blocked them either from trauma from what happened to Hopper, or because the Mind Flayer took so much out of her, or something like that. But I'm guessing that she's got some sort of block in her, or like I said, they blocked her powers when she was younger, and somehow that's been activated again. Because yeah, this whole Elle losing her power storyline is very interesting, because I'm not sure what they're going to do with this, and what they're planning. I feel like we're going to have more backstory on her powers and on her abilities and what they did to her at Hawkins' lab, but it's all kind of, they're not giving us much at this point in time. You know, we just see her now. She's a normal girl. She doesn't have her powers, but something is at play here, obviously. But I agree that like her stuff is definitely more drama.
How much her voice now sounds like Winona Ryder's voice. Like when she was reading the letter, it sort of hit me straight away. And I don't know
Yeah.
if that's a deliberate thing, just because like she's adopted her, because obviously Winona Ryder has a very distinct sort of voice.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it could just
No,
be a
you're right.
coincidence. I
It
mean,
could be,
but
but it could all, if it, even if it
yeah,
is, it's very cool. I like that they also have her look a little bit like Joyce, like her hair looks a bit like Joyce's
yeah,
hair, and she's obviously emulating Joyce a bit. Oh, and I don't know if this isn't a big thing, but I just love that she finally has a room, like a normal kid's
yeah.
room, you know, like, 'cause at the lab, obviously she was kept in like a sterile white room, and Hopper's place was basically just a cabin in the woods, so she didn't really have the chance to
Mm,
personalize anything. But here she has like a room with like that she's decorated that looks like her own. I just love seeing Elle be able to like experience some normal things, because the poor kid has been through so
so
much
much.
trauma.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
much trauma. And now she's going through more because of the stupid bullies at her
Unfortunately, I was going to
school.
say that, so we'll get to that. But yeah, it's a
Mm.
strong episode for Al. I
Yeah.
did like you. I liked that letter, and obviously, nice use of California Dreaming. Like
Yes.
some good musical choices once again in this
Yes.
episode, like the
Yes.
Kate Bush song they use at one point, which is very,
Hmm.
very good stuff. But yeah, I really like the letter. It was just so perfect. This sort of catch-up letter where she says, you
Yes.
know, it's been 100 and something or other days, and she literally
Yeah.
runs through the whole family and what they're sort of doing.
Mm.
Like, I think the best stuff so far. Like, I enjoyed the sort of like the sort of drug stuff. Like the first bit
Yeah.
with Jonathan when he's just trying to hide it from Joyce, and he almost gets caught with his new stoner friend. But
Mm.
and yeah, and also it's quite interesting. I thought, yeah, I'm gonna have thoughts on that later. But it was also quite interesting. I thought how they handled Will and his sexuality again, because
Yeah.
there's a girl in his class who seems to have a crush on him, but
Hmm.
like Al just mentions in the letter,
He's
yeah,
interested in, I think he's interested in someone,
but he
but we
hasn't
don't
said
know who.
who.
Yeah, no, they
And I,
definitely seem to be pushing that
yeah,
angle a bit more this season.
yeah, but
Mm.
also I'm wondering if they might just keep it quite vague like that, because obviously you can get, because this is the 80s, and you know you
Yes.
can get quite bogged down in that
Yeah,
stuff.
they have wound back the 80s porn in this season, or at least it feels that way to me. It feels more, again, like the early seasons where it was like, this is a show set in the 80s, not a show where we vomited up
Okay,
the 80s onto the show. So
okay,
it felt a little bit more toned down to me, which I definitely appreciated a bit more. So
okay.
that was a point in my book.
That's fair. I will say, you know, going into this season, I was speculating on the references, particularly in the video store scenes with Steve,
Yes. Yes.
because we're now in 86 and
Hmm.
it's not happened yet in the episode I've seen, but because of Steve's season 2 Tom Cruise thing,
Yes.
1986 was the year of Top Gun. So
Top Gun,
I'm
yes,
just
it was,
thinking
wasn't
it's
it?
the perfect opportunity for him to update his Tom Cruise impersonation. And it's a really funny vibe they have with Robin being into the more cool indie type art house movie, and
yes.
Steve more the mainstream sort of trashy type movies. Because also Howard the Duck came out that year,
Oh no!
and
Let's hope they stay away from that.
that is such a Steve pick. I could totally see Steve.
Oh, it is, isn't it? Yeah, definitely. I loved the Fast Times reference when Steve and Robin were in the car, and he's
That
like,
was good.
they were talking about the girl that Robin likes. It's like she returned it, paused at this moment. You know why you paused at this moment? Boobies. And I just
Yeah,
love how he's like, hey,
that's
I
good.
like boobies, you like boobies, everyone likes
Yeah,
boobies in this car. Steve
yeah,
and Robin are everything. Their
yeah.
dynamic is just, I mean, it's the best dynamic. Lesbian and dumb dude bro who hangs out with her. So good. And I love how supportive Steve is, you know, how he's encouraging Robin to like go and talk to her crush. And he's just their friendship. I'm so glad they didn't make it romantic because it just works so much better as this dynamic. At least I think so.
I agree.
And I just think they work
Yeah,
so well together, those two.
yeah. And we're going to get there in the second episode. But another thing I was looking forward to in this season was kind of the video store being used as like a base for like investigations. And we sort of get there in this. So I'm hoping for plenty of stuff in the video store.
Oh, video
That
stores.
is
Remember video stores.
such a gold mine. But yeah,
I
of
miss video stores.
potential. To like the end of season 3 with Tammy, like Robin's
I
crush. Yeah,
loved that. As soon as they said Tammy, I was like, oh my God, that's Robin's
the
crush.
one who sings like a Muppet, basically.
And I love that she and Steve both kind of look at each other like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, that was so good. It was a great
Yeah,
callback. And it just again just shows their friendship and shows how comfortable they are with each other. And that was a great moment. I loved that.
yeah. Okay, so I think the other stuff with Al is obviously the stuff with the bully Angela. Is it Angela? I think,
Angela.
and her friends, and obviously that's very hard to watch. And there's obviously
So hard.
I mean, obviously it was really, really charming than Al did this model of Hopper, and yeah, then for her just to be humiliated at school for taking it in. I mean, it's it's going to be very hard to watch, really, those scenes. So
Elle broke my heart. The fact, though, I absolutely loved that the project was to do your heroes, and Elle did, like, she chose Hopper. I thought that was beautiful. I loved that she referred to him as her dad. I love that that is like how she sees him. He is her father. I loved seeing Will look so protective of Elle. Like he looked
yeah,
really concerned, you know, that his sister is getting picked on. And Elle just kind of broke my heart in the first episode, like just really broke my heart. I just, she's always broken my heart, Elle. She's had, this poor kid has been through so much. And I was actually saying to Stephen as we watched the episode, I said, this sort of bullying has got to be bad enough for just your average kid, you know? For a kid like Elle, who has been through so much already in her young life, and then to come to this new place and finally get to be a normal kid and finally get to go to school and do normal kid stuff, and she's just getting bullied relentlessly. And when we get into episode 2, we can talk a little bit more about like what that ends up doing and how that ends up making her feel. But it's really horrible. And I understand why they took that route. And I think someone like Elle would probably get picked on because she is different. And I think it really
yeah.
shows what sociopaths kids can be. Like, God, you forget what horrors children can be. They are just awful.
Well,
And
we said this
yeah,
back in season 1, didn't we? And I mean, in some ways, this feels like going back to a bit of some of the season 1 stuff, because
yeah,
obviously after season 1, the other 2 seasons, we didn't have so much in the school.
no,
So in a way,
no.
this does feel like going back. You can probably quite believe, unfortunately, then this portrayal, this bully of Angela, probably is quite accurate, unfortunately.
It is,
Even back in
unfortunately.
the 80s. But Millie Bobby Brown very good actor, probably doesn't get enough credit in many ways for the amount of range she's shown over like these 4 seasons, and maybe Max, and also partly Lucas, because obviously they're kind of gone their own ways at the start of the season, and interesting new direction for Lucas. Max is seeking therapy, which we sort of knew going in as a result of what happened. Max in this episode, I liked what they were doing. I thought that was a good therapy scene. One thing I liked about it was I kind of liked how at one point she told like an awkward joke as a way to just, you know, like disguise her like insecurities. I thought that was something, you know, someone that age would probably do, struggling to open up. The actress doing a good job of Chrissy, who we'll talk more about, but I like that stuff with Max taking an interest in her and kind of being worried about what's going on with her.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a good touch as well.
I think Max's character, in season 1, because, you know, there was a lot of shit that went down in season 3. So I like that they show that she hasn't just, you know, moved on, that this is an issue for her. I thought the therapy session was a very good scene, and I think it was a really great way to get across the exposition of what has happened in Max's family. You know, we learn that her stepdad left and that her mother is now working 2 jobs, and, you know, her life is obviously going down. Her mother's drinking a lot and things like that. And also we see that she's disconnected from the rest of the party. And you know, she's shut off from her friends, and I think that's actually a very Max thing to do. Like we've seen in the last couple of seasons, she's not great with emotion. You know, she doesn't like to talk to people, she doesn't like to open up. So I think her defense mechanism of just shutting away and hiding from everyone, I think that makes absolute sense for her character. Sadie Sink is great. You know, we knew that she would be great going in. She's been really solid since she was brought into the series. So I think that Max's stuff is really, I mean, like what you've said, it basically covers it. I think it's a really good introduction, and then obviously as the episodes go on, we'll see more and more of her journey. But I like that they're showing the fallout from season 3 and showing that, you know, she's having a hard time. And obviously they're giving us hints that something might be wrong with her, because they're like, are you still getting the headaches? Are you still getting the nightmares? So we see her downing like some, I mean, it's only Tylenol, but, you know, still she's obviously struggling with something that she's keeping secret. And maybe that's why she's so open to helping Chrissy, because she sees, oh, someone else is in distress, someone else might need help. And so, yeah, I think Max's direction and her characterization this season, I really like that they're giving her some more focus and developing her a bit more. So I really like that. I also really like, because we talked about how she's separated from the group. So the dynamic of the party has obviously changed, because it was always the 4 of them. Now Will's gone and they've started high school, and we see that there's a bit of a disconnect here. And I actually think it's done in a really, really good way.
With Chrissy in the bathroom where she's concerned, and Chrissy sort of tells her, you know, to go away. And obviously we're going to talk about the end of the episode, which I think is a really strong ending and really sets up, you know, the season well. But I think that's it. Obviously it's worth talking about Lucas and his new direction, because he has joined the basketball team called the Tigers, and you have quite an interesting scene like at the start of this new season where the captain, I think his name's Jake or something, he gives like
he creeps me out.
Yeah, like I didn't like him from the start, and he gives what for me is a very insincere speech where he's talking about, you know, all the shit this town has been through the last year or so, and he's casually, you know, referencing like Billy and Hopper and stuff like that, and it's like and you've got obviously some of like the main characters in the crowd, and I think they're looking at each other in disbelief. It's like, what is this guy doing, sort of thing. But obviously interesting, with Lucas, because he is actually like trying to move away a little bit from being like the nerd and some of his like former sort of ways. Him and Max, it appears, have like broken up, at least at the moment. And there's a little bit of a disconnect, maybe because she isn't the best at like communicating her feelings and stuff. But Lucas pretty much says it in this episode, and he pretty much just wants, in a way, to hang around with more cool people. I mean, I don't think he means it as malicious as that, but
No.
he is saying maybe he wants to do other stuff apart from.
Almost a little sad, because when he expresses it to Mike and to Dustin, he basically says, I'm tired of being bullied, I'm tired of being picked on, I'm tired of being the loser. And I think the disconnect, like, we don't have middle school here in Australia. You go straight from primary school to high school. And that disconnect between primary school and high school is huge. Like, when you go to high school, everything kind of changes. And that's when you start to try and figure out who you are and what your status is. And of course, popularity and status like that is much more important in high school than it is in primary school. And so I think that Lucas wanting to be part of the popular crowd and wanting to move up the social ladder is very indicative of what happens in high school. And I think that when you do move from primary school to high school, you do start to drift away from your friends as you start to go into different areas and different clubs. And so I actually thought this was a very realistic look at what happens to groups when they go to high school. And I also think, and I'm not quite sure where this feeling comes from, but I swear to God, it just feels right that it's Lucas who's moving away. Like, he seems like the character who would start to gravitate towards the jock club or something. I'm not sure why I feel that way. I just do. Like, it just makes sense. Like, if any of them were going to drift away, it was going to be Lucas. He was a bit more athletic. He maybe is a bit better looking than the other guys traditionally. He's got the markers to become a popular kid. He's rocking his flat top this season. He's doing well. So I thought that was actually a really interesting dynamic to set up. And I thought that was actually, like, sad, but also very true to what happens when you do go to high school and you start to drift apart from your friends.
Some support for his friends or for, like, old friends, but at the same time he's maybe caught between the two camps where he is trying to fit into, like, this other way of life. So there's actually a lot they can do with that. So it makes sense, and they would maybe go in that direction. And it's also possible because of the stuff with Max, with them splitting up, then that might be a big part of it, where if they were still together, like, maybe he would be less inclined to make this change. I didn't like the scene with sort of that featured Jonathan and Nancy. That scene was kind of dull.
The one where they were, like, going back and forth talking about what they liked about the other one, and then they end up by being like, oh, that's why I love them. And then you find out that they're not seeing each other over spring break. Are you talking about that one?
Just kind of he seemed, obviously Fred will talk more about, but he seems to have a little bit of a crush on Nancy.
A little bit.
I think she's a little bit out of his age group, so I'm not sure if it would. Yeah, she seems to have a few years on him anyway.
Jonathan's new friend.
I hate him.
Me too. Thank God, something we agree on.
He's so annoying. He's so over the top.
So annoying. Oh, thank God.
Because I know that actor from something else as well. He looks familiar, but he's terrible. And I'm just hoping it's just this thing where it's before they get into, like, the main plot, and then he might be disregarded, or maybe he'll just naturally bed more into the group as they get going, so he might not be as annoying. But no, I find him very irritating. I'm not
thank
quite.
God.
I think it's partly lazy stoner humor, which I think has just been done to death. And I'm not sure I quite see Jonathan hanging out with this guy, really.
I know, because I guess Jonathan never really had friends. Like, he's always been a bit of a loner, so maybe he just picked the other loner to be friends with. And like Elle says, they smoke their plant that comes from the earth.
Yeah, because as I said, that original scene was quite funny, but it's then the stuff when they're hanging out, which I just found really annoying.
I can't stand him. I don't think the actor is charismatic. I don't think the character brings anything. The dude needs to get a haircut. It's just not. This character adds almost nothing to this series so far. So
terrible. And I've seen, we're not alone. I think I've seen at least one other person say that. In the second episode, he's even worse. But we don't really need to waste time. Introduce the Hellfire Club. And I think this might be part of it. I just thought those characters were a bit OTT as well, and
I agree.
because I mean, if you go back to the first season, I think a lot of it, obviously, it's exaggerated for drama, but a lot of that stuff, it did felt like these are pretty realistic type teen or in that sort of age group, and yeah, these characters just felt quite cartoonish, and I mean that
Yeah.
scene where it's like in the dinner hall and stuff, and I think the problem with that scene partly is that Mike and Dustin, who are obviously characters we like, aren't allowed to be funny in it. It's like it's more about the other characters, and the scene might have been more entertaining if Mike and Dustin could get like responses in, but it was mostly just them like looking at them funny and but I mean, characters like that might sort of settle down as we get more into it, because obviously there's a very interesting end to the episode with the Eddie character. But yeah, I think there's some small nitpicks. I think there was some stuff which was a bit over the top and a bit cartoonish, and
I agree.
Yeah.
Erica did not annoy me as much this season. In fact, I kind of liked Erica from what we've seen so far. First of all, I think they've toned her down a bit, which I think is very good. Either they've toned her down or the actress who plays her has gotten a bit older and is not overacting as much. You know, I did like her going up against Eddie when he's all like, and what class are you? Like, I don't know World of Warcraft, not World of Warcraft. I don't know D&D that well, but you know, she basically comes back and is like, I'm a level 12, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So I thought that was good. When Steven saw her with the American flag on her back, you'll be proud of me. I turned to him and I was like, well, you can't spell America without Erica.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so Erica has definitely gotten better this season. Might actually become a character that I could like, because I think they've toned her down a bit. So not on the hating Erica train anymore. You'll be happy to know.
It warms my heart.
Good.
To come to the club with them, and Max doesn't want to come. They try, because I think they try Steve at some point, don't they? I think Dustin does. And...
Yes, and there's a great line I love where Dustin's like, "You're just jealous that I have another older male friend who isn't you," and Steve's just like, "Ew, no, dude, what?" I thought that was a great moment.
But yeah, it's obviously fantastic. Then Lucas, who would have been in the club, it's actually his sister who replaced him. So that's really good. And I mentioned the directing and the quality of the directing. I think that's shown in that sort of scene where it's like intercutting between the basketball game and then playing this D&D game, and I just like the slow motion shots, and I love the fact that it's like Lucas's big moment because he gets called up from the bench and
finally off the bench.
Yeah, and it's also Erica's big moment at the same time, and it's like simultaneous. So you get like the basketball moving in slow motion, you get the dice moving. It's so good. I absolutely love that scene.
That was fun. Right at the end of that sequence, I was like, yes, Sinclair siblings for the win, you know, because it was like really their moment to shine. So no, that was a fun scene. That was really well edited together.
Important to this season as well, because it's in that scene they mention like the character of I've forgotten how you say
Vecna.
Vecna, yeah. So,
Vecna.
Okay, which reminds me, the only other stuff to talk about is the Joyce stuff with.
Gosh, Joyce. She's been a bit forgotten about this season. That's right. So Joyce gets so far. So Joyce gets a package. That sounds dirty. Joyce gets a package from Russia, containing a very creepy doll, like really creepy doll that has nipples.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely one of the best gags of the episode with Murray, and because he immediately gets excited and they're talking over the phone. He's like, yeah, do you want to check if it's got nipples? And he when she says, he dives in a bath, basically getting
into
excited.
an ice bath. Oh,
And the reason
yes,
it's
I
so
love that.
funny as well is because obviously it makes it look like he's being pervy, whereas he's actually not, because he's cottoned on to something by the fact that he has nipples, and he starts thinking, "Oh my God, it's the KGB." You know, that's kind of
Yes,
where his suspicions the bomb inside, and of course he's like crouching down in anticipation, and no, it's that cryptic sort of letter that hints that maybe Hop might still be alive in Russia.
Yes.
So I quite
Which
enjoyed
of
that
course we
stuff.
know he is.
Obviously,
That was
we didn't
fun.
get much, and yeah, because there's that funny scene. Is it in the same episode where she's doing something up the pole or something, or
Yeah, so basically she's trying to smash
yeah,
the box, and so she's outside with a rope over a tree branch, and she's got like these big goggles on, and like this family across the road are like, and that's when she's like, why am I doing this again? And Murray's like, well, if it's a bomb in there, and then the thing breaks. And he's just like, Joyce, Joyce, Joyce. And she's like, it's fine. The rope just broke. Everything's okay. But no, I love when he's all like, can you look under the doll's clothes? And she's like, what? He's like, look under the doll's dress. Can you look under the doll's dress? And then she just pulls it up and she's like, oh, it has nipples. Like, what the
yeah,
hell? So yes, Joyce
yeah,
seems to be doing well. And I have
yeah,
to say
she
again,
does.
Murray, who is a character who has annoyed me for 2 seasons, once again, not actually annoying me as much this season. So
Yeah,
we've got some improvement. That's good.
yeah.
This season seems to be stepping up its game a little bit as far as characterization goes, at least in the first episode. So we'll see what happens. But yes, Murray, I actually found that. But as soon as I realized she was calling him, I was like, oh no, creepy conspiracy guy. But he turned out to be okay. So that's all right. And when we get to episode 2, we can talk more about the Murray Joyce dynamic.
Into detail of some of this rhyme, because he of course was in the very first episode, and he was
I
like the
forgot about
UFO
that.
conspiracy
I
guy.
actually forgot that he
So it
was
actually
all the way
works
back in
quite
season
well when
1.
they sort of
Mm,
bring him back, and he's a big
yeah.
part of this.
I had totally forgotten
Yeah,
that he was, because I
yeah,
was on Twitter or something and someone was like, "Oh yeah, Murray been there since season 1." I was like, "What? No, he's not. He
yeah.
comes in
You
season." And I was
sort of
like,
forget.
"Oh,
Yeah,
he does."
yeah,
And it's so quick. It's such a brief scene that you just kind of dismiss him. So yeah, that was good.
yeah.
But yes, so let's talk before we
The
go to season
end
2.
of
We'll talk a bit about the end of the episode and the build up to that, because this is definitely getting into the more horror vibes of the season. So we have that character Chrissy that Keith mentioned earlier, and she wanders into the woods and sees a grandfather clock ticking in a tree, and it's a very spooky image. We've actually seen this image in a few of the trailers. You know, it's a very spooky, very horror scene. And something is freaking her out really badly. So she goes to Eddie, who is the leader of the Hellfire Club, who is apparently also the local drug dealer, and she wants
yeah,
something that will
something
help her
stronger.
escape.
Yeah, because
Something
she's
strong. He offers her
talking him
marijuana,
early.
and she's like, nah, nah. Then she
Not
asks for
my
like special
jam.
K.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, honey, just start with a little bit of marijuana. You don't want to go to the hard stuff right away. Like, let's ease into this whole drug taking thing. You know, this is not a good way to go. But they end up so Eddie lives in the same trailer park that Max is now living in. So she witnesses a little bit of this. She witnesses Chrissy come over to Eddie's house to get the drugs. And then we have that weird trance that Chrissy goes into, where
Mm.
she's remembering something to do with her mother. We get the impression that her mother is dead. She's being haunted by something. And this scene, I really loved this scene. This scene was like something out of
It's
a really
fantastic.
good horror movie. Yeah. Just the atmosphere of the cuts between Chrissy in her trance and Eddie trying to like snap her out of the trance, and her eyes are like flickering and looking really creepy. And then we see the monster. And let me tell you, this monster is like, I think he's actually the creepiest monster we've seen so far on this show. So creepy. He looks
Possibly,
like,
yeah.
yeah, some sort of predator like esque type monster with like veins and some sort of mullet. He's very creepy. And he reaches into Chrissy, and oh my god, the graphicness of her death was insane.
Yeah.
The the bone snapping and the jaw snapping and the part where she like flew up onto the roof.
Yeah.
I was having the best time watching this scene. It was so intense, and I just loved the horror vibes. What about
So
you?
did I. It's a
Hmm.
great scene because I mean it's the sort of thing this show does quite well, where you might have an episode where there's a lot of setup stuff, and some of it might be better than others, but then it really hits you at the end with this great hook. And for me, this end scene is classic Stranger Things for two reasons. One, because I think this show has always done horror very well. So if we are going to get a more horror centric season as opposed to sci-fi, then I'm happy
Me
with that
too.
change because it does
Hmm.
horror really well, and it's a really disturbing, freaky scene. But
Yep.
also, it's classic Stranger Things because of the way it subverts your expectations, because
Hmm.
it sets you up to think that Eddie's going to be the threat in that scene.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
he's luring her back to to his
Hmm.
trailer. He's got drugs,
Yeah.
and yeah,
It's a bit
because
dodgy.
you see her as the victim, but you kind of
Yes.
assume he's going to be the one who's like the actual threat, and obviously it doesn't
Mm.
work out that way. And I'll say this actually because I think in the first scene with Eddie, I wasn't feeling his character too much, but
No.
I felt him a lot more in this scene. I could see more
Yes.
potential with him
I
in this
agree.
scene,
Yes,
and
definitely agree.
it's a really strong scene, a really strong like end to the episode that makes you think,
Hmm.
oh, okay, yeah, I've got to watch more. And this is a really good hook. And
Mm.
another thing I'm maybe wondering is how. I mean, it's obviously perfect that Max is there. She's across the way because I'm just thinking of some of the stuff we've seen in the trailer and like what she's going to go through the season. And we've seen obviously in the trailer kind of her floating in the air. And it
Mm.
just makes you maybe a bit concerned for what could happen to her this season because
Yeah.
you think at this point she might have something similar going on with her. A little bit sad she got killed at the end because I actually was quite liking Chrissy's character as well.
Mm.
And the actress was doing a good job. I thought they seem to be showing with her like the other side of like popularity, like how
Yes.
much of a
Yes.
burden it can be, how it's not always such a cozy sort of thing, especially in high
Yeah.
school, and some of the
Definitely.
pressures with that. So, but I guess that's another way it subverts you because throughout this episode, I was thinking, okay, we've got a new character for the season in Chrissy. I sort of,
Yeah.
because of the way she had scenes with Max, I sort of was thinking, yeah, she's probably
She
going to
was
be
gonna.
around this season. And of
Yeah.
course, they changed that.
Stranger Things has always been so good at giving us those hooks that make us go, crap, now I have to go watch the next episode, you know? Because, like I said, originally I wasn't feeling this season that much, but after the first episode, it had that hook that kind of kept me going. And then, like, we'll talk about episode 2 soon, but I think it was definitely a great way to end it. And I loved those horror vibes and how deep they were going into horror. Because they've always been on the verge of horror, but they've always been a bit more science fiction-y rather than horror. So
Yeah.
they've never really delved full into like the horror aspect of the show. And I think that this season, from everything we've seen in this episode and the next episode, I think that's where it's going to go. And that is totally up my alley.
Chapter 2 of season
Mhm.
4, which is called Wagner's Curse. I think I said it right that time. Wagner's Curse. And naturally, it makes sense to pick up with the what happens to Chrissy
Mhm.
and the investigation. Obviously, Max is nearby, and you obviously get the local police going to like the trailer to like investigate, and we see how quickly it spread around town with the
Yes.
news reporting it. So I like how we see the various characters seeing it for the first time, like Steve and Robin in like the video store.
Yeah.
And this episode was good. It was strong, and I think I liked it a bit more than episode 1. And I think part of
Yes.
the reason is because they were starting to get together as a group, and you were starting to
Yeah.
get like this sort of detective type vibe, and
The
then
dynamics were coming back together.
coming back,
Yeah.
classic Stranger Things. And
Yeah.
I like how active Max is appearing so far this season, how she had that interest and how she
Mhm.
started. There's an interesting scene with her and Dustin actually, which we'll talk about. But I sort of liked how she was very what's going on. I mean, this is right near where I live. And she
Yeah.
obviously had that line about Eddie where it said, well, he looks scared. And obviously they were debating what that could mean. But
Yeah.
that stuff in this episode I thought was like really strong. And it's good also because it incorporates like the others. Like, I think Nancy had a much better episode this time because she
Yes.
got drawn into that stuff. And whenever she's kind of playing like the reporter type character and she's got like something to like chew on like that, I think
Yeah.
she's a much better character. And obviously we're going to see about her and Jonathan, but I sort of feel like maybe Nancy might benefit from having a season off from Jonathan.
I think so. I think Nancy works. Yes, I think she works best when she's doing her badass girl power investigating stuff other than being in a love triangle. Like, I was finding Nancy much more likable this season because she was like, getting shit done, and actually, she's going out to investigate. And I love the way she makes her way past the cops, when she's trying to like get into the crime scene. It's realistic, and I think that shows a realistic portrayal of what happens again. As we were talking when we're talking about episode 1 about the transition from middle school to high school. Well, I think Nancy and Jonathan are showing the transition from high school to college. Like, what happens when high school is over? What happens to your high school boyfriend or your high school girlfriend? What happens if you have different plans or you want to go to different colleges? So I think that that's actually quite a realistic thread to take to show that they're maybe having some issues.
Because
and
I think with our kind of disagreements on that stuff in the past, I think it's been more based on some of the stuff with Jonathan and Nancy I've actually liked because I've just naturally liked their characters and what they've been doing when they've been investigating stuff and things like that. And I just find their dynamic a bit more interesting than her dynamic with Steve. But
boo.
Yeah. But as I've said, the romance stuff, not so much. The romance stuff I can take or leave. But I sort of defend their stuff because I think the majority of it isn't about the relationship anyway. It just sort of happens that they are in a relationship. They don't sort of lean on that too much. But so in a way, you could just see them as like close sort of friends. But but it does feel like maybe they've reached a natural sort of impasse where maybe it's sort of time, at least for this season, maybe to go their separate ways for a while. Fred, I thought was a bit less annoying as well. I thought he was a bit annoying in the first episode.
Yes.
He was better this episode, and they had some nice scenes together. And we can talk about that stuff later, really. But
yeah, we'll definitely get into that in a bit.
One of the scenes of the episode, I think, is actually when Max first goes to Dustin and she mentions this stuff. And it's an interesting scene because she's very much accusing Eddie because she thinks it's like, prime suspect. And it's a good scene because Dustin immediately jumps to his defense.
Yes.
And he says this thing about when me and Mike started high school, he was the only one who was actually nice to us. He was the only one who talked to us. And there's sort of a darkly funny, like, Ted Bundy line, isn't there? From, but they said the same about Ted Bundy.
Yeah. I heard that. I was like, okay, first of all, great reference.
That is a great reference.
Why are you reading about Ted Bundy?
yeah. Dustin's like, really? You're comparing Eddie to Ted Bundy?
I know.
No, but I really like the back and forth in that scene. That was
and I think that also because we were saying how we weren't too sure about Eddie as a character. So I think this episode with Dustin saying, he was there for us, it shows you a little bit more to Eddie's character. It shows you that he's a bit more than just, a stoner and a drug dealer and stuff. Like, it shows that he obviously cares, and he cares enough to help these kids out. So, it adds a little bit of a layer to his character that I think we need, because I was a bit iffy on his character at first. But the more layers we get, I think that's really good. So, yeah, I like that scene. I like that Max immediately goes to Dustin, obviously, because it's almost like, the group of them, they're in this kind of secret club where they know everything that's going on in Hawkins, but no one else really knows. So there's really only a certain amount of people that she can go and talk to. And of course we get, we see her and Dustin trying to hunt Eddie down, and they go to the video store, and there's a great scene in there that I absolutely love when they're trying to find Reefer Rick.
Yeah.
Great name.
And it's funny, isn't it? Dustin keeps shouting that later on when
Reefer Rick! It's like, dude, calm down. You've obviously never bought drugs before, but what I absolutely love is Robin realizing that they have all these clients here, and so they start going through the rental history. And I said, I bet you anything, the first movie will be Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And I was like, yes, I knew it. And then of course, Cheech and Chong.
That's so funny. That's excellent. So like, yeah, this must be the drug guy. Yeah, because like the different combinations of movies are really funny, because like you get Dumbo like paired up with something at one point, don't you?
Yeah, something really bizarre. And then there was like 16 Candles and something else. And I was like, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. As soon as you see Fast Times at Ridgemont High, it's going to be like ultimate stuff from the 80s.
And that goes back to the whole Phoebe Cates stuff from last year, doesn't it? He's in that, of course, it's an early part.
Definitely.
So that's all very clever stuff. But
that was a great
I mean,
thing.
that stuff, I said there's so much potential with them in the video store, and it's so funny them just coming in and Dustin asking, how many phones do you have here? And
he just dives across the counter.
Just how direct he is in like going to the computer. But this is some of the stuff I love in Stranger Things, this sort of investigation. And another thing I think's interesting about it, which makes a lot of sense, is because it's set in the 80s, there's obviously phones aren't as readily available.
Yes.
Obviously, hardly anyone had a cell phone, so it actually makes sense that they have to. Definitely, so it actually makes sense, and they have to find somewhere where they can actually use like a phone and
multiple phones, and
So, but I just like you. I love that scene of them just going through the computer, looking at like it's such a great way to like do this investigation, and and you get some good stuff with Steve. When he's trying to push like Dr. Zhivago on that girl who he likes. Because it's like a double videotape, which is very.
Oh my god! Remember double videotape?
Because it's
when
such
the movie
a long
couldn't
film.
fit on one tape.
That's so good.
We had a double videotape of Titanic because Titanic wouldn't fit on one VHS.
Oh, that makes sense.
You had to put it on two. That was brilliant. And then she's all like, "Oh, so my boyfriend will like this," and he's like, "Oh,
he
boyfriend,
sells
yeah."
He's trying to sell her to it as like it's full of romance and like fighting or action, and then she brings up the boyfriend, and it's also funny when he gets defensive because they're getting on his case about not helping out, and he sort of talks about how I don't just serve the babes. I mean, I've got all shapes and sizes, I think is the way he puts it.
Yeah. It's like, you're very generous, Steve. Like, plus I also love in that scene how he is actually a little jealous that Dustin has another older friend. Like, you actually see him like complain a little bit about this other guy that Dustin's hanging out with. And I'm like, oh, big bro is jealous. His little bro went and got another big bro. So I thought that whole scene was just a highlight.
I also enjoyed the scene with him and the canoe paddle when they get to like the guy's house.
So typically Steve, isn't it? Like, everyone's trying to be like subtle and sneaky, and Steve's just like, let's get a paddle and just shove it in. Just come on, he's in here. My oar's gonna find him. And then when he actually does just jump out, and everyone's like, oh my god, Dustin. I mean, I think we talked about this in like our season 2 or season 3 talk, but like you never expected that to be a dynamic that was ever going to happen. I mean, it turned out to be like one of the best dynamics in the series, Steve and Dustin. You just can't imagine the series without it. Just so good. I love it. So yeah, that scene was a definite highlight. It again shows how Robin is usually the one that thinks outside the box and figures out the solution, because she's the one that figures out how to,
Yeah.
how to find Reefer Rick. Still love that name. That's so good. But yeah, so I think all of their scenes and their investigating and like juxtaposed with Nancy investigating, that definitely feels like classic Stranger Things, like this is
Sure.
what started the whole thing. This season actually feels like, these first two episodes actually feels like we're getting a bit of a mystery. I spoke about how, for me anyway, seasons 2 and 3 felt like they were pretty much the same plot. This feels different. And so I'm actually really liking that there's something different and something fresh and a mystery that we actually don't know. So that's working really well for me.
Yeah, and it's obviously, it gets mentioned in the trailer, like that whole line about, because Eddie says, they're like, well, what happened? And he's like, if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. And they're like, actually, we're the people who will.
We're the people that would believe you, yes, because we have seen shit. And I like how, yeah, sorry, go.
Well, yeah, it's just the whole monologue that we hear Dustin sort of do in the trailer, where he's talking about the two worlds converging and how people often say Hawkins is cursed, and they're not wrong, basically. And his speech in this, I was definitely getting Buffy vibes and the Hellmouth. And
yes, definitely.
He's talking about a very similar thing. And it's actually an interesting step this season, because obviously the other seasons, it has mostly been like different versions of like the mind flare creatures. So it actually does seem like they're moving away from that a bit,
which I really like. And I really, enjoying that. But I do like that they're still using the game as the euphemism and as the metaphor, and using the game, the D&D game, to name the monsters. The Mind Flayer, the Demogorgon, these all came from D&D. So I like that Vecna is also a D&D. Like, I just really like the way they tie D&D into the series, especially because, like, and we see it in this episode, in the first episode, like, D&D was like a big hysteria thing in like the 80s. Like, Steven's looking at me yesterday when they're going on about like the Satanism and stuff like that. I'm like, no, that actually happened. That was a thing in the 80s. Like, parents got legit concerned that their kids were playing this game, and it actually became this whole hysteria surrounding D&D. It's crazy. It's a board game. And I've never played it, but I didn't know the dice actually had 20 sides. I was very impressed when I saw that. Wow, there are really 20 of them.
Yeah, because there's a documentary I watched a couple of years ago, or 2 or 3, that were about that sort of thing, about satanic cults, and they actually mentioned in that about the whole 80s hysteria. And I think that's what makes the storyline in this episode so good, because you can't just dismiss it as, they're exaggerating over the top, and because obviously this stuff has been brought up, and it is just crazy. And yeah, so we can talk a bit about that, because obviously the stuff with Lucas, with the Jake character, and Jake is almost like the crazy cult leader in himself, sympathy, but because he acts like such a bigot from the start of the episode, because he's immediately calling like Eddie a freak and sort of, and it's like, my girlfriend doesn't take drugs, and that's interesting, sort of the fact that she maybe tried drugs for the first time, and that happened, or maybe it's more than she'd always did drugs and he didn't know about it, or didn't want to know about it.
I guess we'll find out. But no, his whole thing of like, oh, the Satanists and the freaks, you have to get them. It's like, dude, you got to calm down. And then, of course, Paul Lucas is stuck in the middle, because he's stuck between his new friends and his old friends. And knowing that what his new friends want to do maybe isn't the best thing. Also, Paul Lucas had his first hangover. Isn't that just a rite of passage for like every teenager?
Of course,
I thought that. I was like,
I can confirm the first one does hit you quite hard, because
your first one
you're
is
not used to it. It's new territory.
Your first hangover. We've all been there, Lucas. Every teenager has had their first hangover. So, I also find that interesting, because it shows like, we've been with these characters since they were children, and now they're teenagers. So we're actually going to see them like grow up. Because like, I was like, Lucas, why are you drinking? You're like 12. And I was like, oh no, wait, he's like 15 now. So it really is I think we're moving into slightly more mature themes, slightly more mature actions. We're going to see the kids maybe, move on to actually being teams. So yeah, I think Lucas, being caught between his old team and his new team, it's a very interesting dynamic to see play out, and to see him almost like, I feel like in this episode we're starting to see like how far is he going to go to be popular? Is he going to go out with these kids and form a vigilante group, or is he going to go back and realize that this is a bad path? It's that kind of, again, that it's very realistic of sometimes in high school you fall in with the wrong crowd and you get carried away and you might end up doing something that you really regret, whether it's breaking the law or taking drugs or drinking too much. And I think that Lucas having this storyline is a very interesting way and a very, very natural way to show like that's what happens when you go to high school. We're not in middle school anymore. These kids are getting older. They're going to start having these choices.
And I do sort of have a feeling or prediction for something that could happen to bring this to a head, because at the moment, like you said, he's caught in the middle, and he obviously immediately jumps to like the Hellfire Club's defense. But because his sister's now part of the club, I could see some drama with that at some point, where at some point the bullies might go after Erica, and like he's then forced to obviously pick his side, and then obviously actually that's definitely something I could see happening. So
there is one thing I want to mention. Like, there was this one moment with Lucas and another team member that I don't know if it was there deliberately to throw light onto racial issues or if I'm reading too much. But when the cops come to the party area and they're questioning them and stuff, Lucas is at the back, and one of the other black kids on the team comes over to him and kind of elbows him and is like, "Are you okay? Are you all right?" And then reassures him that everything's going to be all right. They just need to answer the questions. And I actually wonder if that was supposed to be like, this. We're talking about black kids in the 80s. I mean, for God's sake, black kids these days have to be scared of police. So I am actually wondering if that was like a little moment to show this other black kid has seen that this young black kid has never been around the cops before, at least as far as he knows, and is maybe worried, and maybe he's coming over to like, reassure him, like, it'll be okay, just do this and we'll be all right. Because I know that black communities and like black parents and black siblings, they have to do this. They have to warn their kids how to behave around the police, how to act if they get arrested, which is a terrible, terrible thing.
Prince of Bel-Air, isn't there, where they get pulled over by cops and they immediately just put their hands on
Will immediately just walks around and just goes straight onto the but I mean that show came out that aired 26 years ago, and anyway, we're getting off topic. That's a whole other thing. But no, I liked that little scene because I thought maybe it was put in there to show the cultural differences. White rich kids, they don't need to worry about being questioned by the police, but young black kids, they do. So I kind of liked that little moment. Even if it wasn't deliberate, I think it added a little something to that scene to show, this is the 80s. Lucas is black in a small town. He has to be careful. So
I didn't think of that. I mean, I sort of missed that when I was watching it. So that's a really good pickup. And it's obviously possible with a lot of the stuff going on the last couple of years. And it's obviously one of the advantages of doing a modern show, which is set in the 80s, is you can actually insert these things because we now have this greater awareness of them. And I do wonder actually if they may play into that drama of his race compared with these other white privileged sort of jocks, because they could sort of play on the idea that as long as he's doing well as a member of the team, they might be reasonably relaxed on him. But as soon as they find an excuse maybe to be a bit arsehole and racist, they might, the loyalty might not spread very fast.
So it'll be interesting to see where this ends up and where this storyline with Lucas goes. But it's just very interesting to see the dynamic that they're setting up and the divide between him and his friends. But I think lost my train of thought. Sorry, we've been discussing so much. My brain's starting to get filled up. But just going back to like the mystery side of things. So we had like the whole Dustin, Steve, Robin searching. I just wanted to go back to the Nancy stuff because I really like the Nancy stuff. And that ties into a little bit more of the horror stuff before we go into what's happening in California. So I really liked Nancy in this episode. I love that she was like, she had to go and report, and she takes Fred's a little bit of a sad sack, but he seemed a bit better this episode. And I like that she gets into the trailer park and she's looking around, and I love her talk with that old man. What was his name? Munson. He's like Eddie's uncle. She goes over and she starts talking. She's like, "Oh, did you have to deal with so and so from the Hawkins Post?" And she references like her
I was
old
going to
boss
ask,
from season
have
3.
we heard that surname in this show before? It does sound like quite a familiar
Munson.
surname. I'm not sure.
Maybe? Because it does sound vaguely familiar, and I wouldn't put it past the show to have mentioned it like somewhere. But maybe next time we rewatch the earlier seasons, we'll have to have a look. But yeah, and then of course from him we get this great like ghost story almost of this past in Hawkins about this old guy. What was his name? Victor Krella or something? Who apparently murdered his whole family. Been around since the 50s, and I've actually started to think. I was saying to Stephen, you know how sometimes, okay, let me see if I can get this out coherently. You have a movie, and the movie ends up with a sequel, and then the sequels world build kind of backwards, almost like Scream 3 introducing Roman suddenly being, correct, or Return of the Jedi revealing Darth Vader. I know.
A flimsy excuse.
I needed an example, but I feel like this season is doing that. Like it's giving us world building that's kind of working backwards, and it's going to tell us this was actually here from the beginning. You just didn't know about it yet. Because I've also noticed in these first 2 episodes, there's been a few flashbacks to like seasons 1 and season 2, which they've never actually done on this show before. So
Nancy has a Barb flashback, doesn't she?
Yes, Nancy has a Barb flashback, episode, and so I thought that was interesting. So I think that's what they're trying to do, is they're trying to world build backwards, which sometimes can work, sometimes doesn't work, but I think it'd be interesting to see where they go, because I really liked this story about this old house and this creepy dude who apparently killed all his family and gouged their eyes out. And so you find out that whatever's going on, it's been going on for a while, even pre-11.
The stuff with Fred, where you have that scene with them in the car and they get, obviously, like the police are investigating the trailer.
Theory that once I saw Fred started to cement. When we saw Chrissy, we kept seeing flashbacks of her mother, and her mother kept saying something like, "I'm making you a dress" or something. So she was obviously something to do with her mother's death. Then we see this Fred guy. He sees the policeman turn into like a zombie or something, which again, we're really getting into the horror this season. And he starts talking about this car accident and how Fred killed someone and you were responsible, and that's where that scar on your face. Oh, and we get a very cool effect where the scar starts actually opening up and bleeding. I thought that was really cool. Then he runs into the woods and all these, again, zombie people saying you killed them. And then of course he gets a vision off the car at the end. So my theory is that this monster is coming after people who have deaths in their past that they either are responsible for or feel responsible for. Because, Chrissy with her mother, now this guy with this. So I think maybe that's what it's surrounding. Kind of, like this monster can pick up on guilt or fear or something concerning a death where someone has died and it's been the person's fault. This is just a theory, but I think that might be what we're working toward.
And the cops accusing him of this, and he's kind of saying it's an accident, and obviously it's sort of in his head, but Nancy obviously notices that he sort of drifts off and like phases out, and she's like, what the hell is that? To the woods. He sort of gets another image of, was it a car on fire or something like that? Which I'm assuming.
He also sees the clock as well.
The clock as well. Yeah.
But the car, I'm assuming, is the car accident that wherever this person died or whatever. Yeah. And he sees the clock, and then he sees the monster, and he gets the same kind of death that Chrissy did.
Death as like
horrifying.
Contorted,
so
basically.
Horrifying. But so good. Like this mystery thread with this new monster and this new investigation, I am here for that, because that's what's been missing for me in Stranger Things for the last 2 seasons, is that sense of mystery and where is this going and what is this monster doing. So I really like that they're doing something new and they're going in a new direction. And this monster, like I said, I find it really creepy. I find the horror elements just perfect. And I think that if they keep going this way, they're going to end up with a really strong horror mystery for this season. And I think that'll be really good.
And yeah, they're building on the mythology, as we said. Like Dustin actually does this speech, and he describes it as like a dark wizard type thing. So it's sort of, further building mythology, and they almost are treating it as the Upside Down as a Hellmouth sort of thing, where you can have other demons sort of come from it. It doesn't just have to be those creatures that we're familiar with. So. Yeah,
and I like that a lot.
Definitely a lot of potential with that this season. So good stuff there. And as I was saying before, I do. It's interesting where Max is going to go with all this, and that you could have a lot of stakes with her, and her maybe having to overcome some stuff and get control of a certain power.
Yeah.
To maybe save herself, sort of thing. Like she could be put in harm's way potentially.
So Mike has come to visit, and well, we didn't mention this, but in episode 1, Elle writes, we mentioned the letter, but her letter is basically full of lies. She's trying to make out that she's like together and she has friends and she's popular, and I think she just doesn't want Mike to think that she's failing, or like, because she feels like such an outsider, and she says that in this episode. So Mike comes to visit, and at first everything's fine. Poor Will is a bit of a third wheel. A third wheel. And we'll talk a bit about Will's characterization as well. But it's really nice to see Mike. It was really nice to see Mike and Elle together again, to see them excited and happy. They obviously still adore each other. But of course, Elle has lied and said that she's friends with Angela, the bully. She takes Mike to the skate rink, and Angela turns up. And it's one of the most awful scenes to watch.
It's horrible to watch, isn't it?
Terrible. They put her in the middle of the skating rink, put a spotlight on her, and then just start circling her and taunting her and yelling at her, and just poor Elle. Like, I was watching that scene, and I said to Stephen, I'm like, they are so lucky she does not have her powers, because given the trauma that they're putting her through, it was just awful. It was awful to watch. It was awful to witness. It just made you feel so bad for Elle, and I had a really hard time watching that scene.
So did I. It's a weird sort of scene where I think obviously it's doing its job by the fact that you are like this disturbed and stuff. And as we said, unfortunately, people like Angela do exist, and it's just very awful to watch. But at the same time, I sort of hope there's not many more scenes like it. I hope they sort of move on a bit from
me too.
after that episode. I thought at times it was a bit OTT, partly just because of the DJ stuff, the extent they went to. The DJ actually putting on a record to be like part of the. I thought that was a bit of a stretch, maybe, but no, like you, it was very awkward to watch, very uncomfortable, and it's almost like bullying, like to the worst level in some way, where you don't just like hit someone and walk off. It's like continuing sort of harassment and bullying, and
And for someone like Elle, who has always felt different and always felt out of place, for her to go to this new place and be called a freak and a loser and stuff. And of course, we see Elle respond the way that Elle always does to threats and people. She gets violent, only she doesn't have her powers anymore. So instead she hits Angela in the face with a skate, which part of me was like, yes, go girl. But the other part of me was like, violence is never the answer. But I think it plays into, and I think this season will probably go into it, especially after we saw that original scene. Elle has always teetered on the whole, am I a monster or not? And this, I think, maybe is supposed to play into that. Like, she doesn't have her powers, but she still hurt someone. And I mean, you can't really blame her for reacting the way she does, but by the same token, she's going to need to learn a little bit of control.
Crosses a line, and
it's definitely crossing a line.
Very
and she's going to need to learn
to. She
literally
cuts into her that skate, and you could sort of see it coming, because although I didn't know exactly what she was going to do, but I sort of knew it was going to.
You could tell she was going to snap. Something was going to happen. And of course, she's worried afterwards that Mike sees her as a monster. And there's a scene between Mike and Elle where they have a bit of a fight, where Elle kind of calls him out on not saying I love you anymore. And part of me was like, okay, look, I understand he's already said it, and I understand that is already cost, but I'm like, but at the same token, you're like 15-year-old kids. Like,
Yeah.
it's I think it's understandable that he doesn't quite know how to say it anymore, even though he's already said it. And I think, like he said,
Sure.
I don't think he needs to say it because he loves Elle. Like anyone who sees him can see how much he loves her. Even still,
Yeah.
even now, he still loves her. He still adores her. He's so upset when he sees her being bullied. You can see his overprotectiveness, go into gear. He's always been like that around her. But I think it makes sense for Elle, who is in this new town without her dad. All the kids hate her. She probably needs some reassurance,
Yeah.
and she's possibly also feeling a little bit like, I don't have my powers, so what makes me special anymore? Like, what is there to love about me if I'm not a superhero? Because like at the end, Mike's like, you're a superhero, and she's like, no, not anymore. I don't have my powers anymore. So I understand why she wants him to say it, but I also understand why he maybe is not saying it, because like, you go from that threshold of being a kid where you can say anything to anyone to being a teenager where you're kind of in a slightly different area, like you're a bit more aware of like adult feelings and that sort of thing. So I think, again, a very realistic portrayal of what happens when you maybe move from like primary school boyfriend girlfriend to high school boyfriend girlfriend. It's a very different dynamic. So for me, I thought that was interesting and it worked.
I think another thing that's so sort of horrifying about the scene and
Mm.
obviously her retaliation is then unfortunately you can see it making things worse for her because obviously
Hmm.
them being douchebag bullies, they're then gonna try and
They're going
gang
to
up on
retaliate.
her and they're gonna
Absolutely. Hmm.
yeah, rather
I
than
want to ask you, what do you think of the Will and Mike dynamic? Like, because I can't figure out whether or not we're supposed to believe that Will is in love with Mike or if he just really misses his
okay.
friend. What do you reckon?
Well, I don't think he's in love with Mike. I
Okay.
never really got that, but
Mm,
I think, yeah, I think he obviously misses his friends
mm.
and or his friend particularly in Mike, and yeah, it sort of continues on what they were doing in season 3 with them, really.
Like a
Yeah.
girl tries to reach out to Will and he recoils. So I do think they're playing with the idea of him being gay. And some of the scenes with him and Ellen Mike, I was like, is he just feeling like a third wheel? Or does he have a subconscious crush on Mike that maybe even
Oh, that's
he's not aware of
interesting.
yet?
Yeah,
Yeah. Because,
yeah.
when you're at that age, you may not know your sexuality, especially in the 80s when, homophobia was rampant. So it could even be that Will is feeling jealous of Mike and Elle, but maybe doesn't even realize why he's feeling that jealous. I don't know if they're going to go in that direction. It could just be a friend thing, which I'm perfectly fine with as well. I'm actually hoping they don't make it a romantic thing, but I'm not quite sure what they're trying to do with Will's sexuality in this season. It feels like they're maybe trying to move into the Will is gay territory, but I'm not sure how far they're going to explore that. Like, was like, you haven't called either. Like, this is a two-way thing. You can't
Yeah.
just get mad at me. And I'm like, no, that's actually a really good point. It takes two to keep in touch. So Will definitely could have, like, maybe he's writing to Elle lots because Elle writes to him. I have to say though, because Murray turns up in this episode. Obviously, the last little bit we need to talk about is, do we see Hopper in this episode? We do,
Yes,
don't
a
we?
little bit. It
Yeah,
actually opens with the end
that's
of
right. The
season
flashback.
3 and
Yes.
what sort of happens, where he
Mm.
pretty much just dives out the way of like the fire, the
Yeah.
explosion. So he just ends up on the
Yeah.
floor, and the Russians find him and kind of
And they
torture
take him.
him. And the vibe
Mm.
we're getting is that they're sort of, in some ways, forcing him to work for them and
Yeah.
almost just become almost like a comrade in a way to them type
Yeah.
thing and whatever project they're sort of working on
Mm.
because you from the trailer you sort of got slave type vibes, didn't you, where he was almost
Definitely.
working as a
Yeah.
slave.
Yeah. So Murray turns up out of the blue. He and Joyce decide to, work a bit together. What I absolutely loved though was the awkward family dinner with the Byers family, Mike and Murray, all sitting at the table eating Murray's risotto, and Jonathan and his friend are high as fuck and are like eating everything in sight. And like Murray and Joyce are trying to like cover. Murray's like, oh yeah, so I had a conference in town and I thought, hey, the Byers live here. And Joyce is like, so he dropped by. And I'm like, you are so lucky that no one at this table is paying attention to you because you guys suck. You absolutely suck at cover
Yeah.
stories. But I loved that awkward family dinner with them all just kind of sitting there, and
Yeah.
Jonathan and his friends being so stoned. So I think at this point, the California stuff, I think it's good drama and good characterization, but I'm not finding it as interesting as the Hawkins storyline.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
for me, the Hawkins storyline is really sucking me in, but I want more of like Mike and Elle, and I want them more involved in the Hawkins storyline. Like, I can't wait until the storylines converge and we finally got everyone back in the same place. But for me, so far, the mystery's working, the horror's working, characterization is good, but I want a little bit more togetherness. Everyone's kind of split up at this point, so I'm looking forward to when we start to converge a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think that's probably similar to how I feel on like the translation. He thinks it's just like a ransom note and that they're playing with
Yeah.
her, and they make that call to like the Russian guy in the phone
I love that
box. And
call because I love
yeah,
seeing how they have to set everything up because it's the 80s. So you have to have the tape recorder and the phone and the
yeah.
computer to divert the phone. And yeah, it's fantastic.
And I like the little tidbit about how Joyce figures out that it might be related to Hopper because of like Enzo on the nose sort
Enzo.
of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the restaurant they were like meant to have their date in. So
Yeah.
so that's a good
Yeah.
detail. And
Mm.
yeah, they obviously ring this guy, and he does demand money, and it's like a place in Arizona. He gives her a place in Arizona.
Alaska.
To,
Alaska.
sorry, Alaska. Yeah, to go
Yeah.
to. And they sort of like they slowly just figure out then it's just a guard type thing, and that Hopper's
Yeah.
maybe paid off the guard sort of
The
thing.
guard.
Because
Mm.
their question is like, well, that doesn't really sound like he's working for the Russians, or
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like he wants a ransom, but it
Mm.
definitely doesn't sound like he's a friend neither. So who the
Yeah.
hell is this guy? And they figure it out. So yeah,
So
yeah.
they're going to jet off to Alaska, and they tell Jonathan that he's in charge. We'll see what happens there.
We'll see. I'm not sure that's the best idea, but
I don't think that's the
okay,
best
we'll
idea
see.
either, but I guess he's 18 at this point, so it's like, yeah,
Okay,
why not?
yeah,
But I think, again, I think
sure.
the second episode, I agree with you. I think it's an improvement on the first. I think it gets more into the mystery. And I think so far, this season is, well, for me, much better than the previous one. And
Okay,
I'm liking the new direction that they're taking. I like the characterization. I think they're doing a great job of showing the reality of, like I said, moving between middle school and high school. We all like to think that we're going to stay best friends with our primary school friends forever, but the reality is that just doesn't happen. So I like that this show
mm,
is showing that that
very
can happen.
rarely, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, with some rough edges, but
Mm.
overall, yeah, I agree with you. I think I'm liking the new direction and the new
Yeah.
things it's setting up. There have been some mixed reviews about this new season from some of the early stuff I've been hearing, so it's
Mm.
always interesting to see where our listeners fall down on. So we're obviously roughly in agreement so far, which is quite rare for
Yeah.
us.
That is
We
quite rare.
we probably agree on enough to continue a friendship, but there's definitely some
Maybe.
massive disagreements. Yeah, maybe we'll see how it goes. But
We'll
yeah,
see.
so that's our first Stranger Things reviews of the new season. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below of these new episodes. What have you liked? What have you maybe not been so keen on? Like and subscribe as always. Share us out on social media. Obviously, look out for more TV reviews. We also do a regular horror movie podcast where we do a bunch of franchise movies, a bunch of like different horror movies. We obviously tend to go into different genres as well at times, and we also do regular top 10 lists. So look out for all that stuff on the channel. We'll be back later in the week with more Stranger Things, but if you want to just plug your channel, Rachel.
Guys, you can follow me, Rachel Macdonald, video essays on TV shows and movies. I will be doing an analysis of Stranger Things season 4 on there, probably within the next week or so. So look out for that. And you can find my Twitter and my Tumblr through my YouTube. Keith usually is lovely enough to put a link in the description. So come and follow me everywhere.
Okay, that's great stuff, guys. Thanks for listening. Keep watching TV and Stranger Things, and we'll be back soon. See you later, guys. Bye.